Have you ever found yourself driving down the highway, just absolutely belting out a famous song at the top of your lungs without ever really stopping to think about what the lyrics actually mean? Well, today, we are taking a deep dive into the psychological intensity of one of the most universally recognized power ballads of all time. Yep, we're talking about Total Eclipse of the Heart. In this explainer, we're going to bypass that incredibly catchy melody just for a moment to reveal a deeply complex and honestly kind of dark emotional narrative that's been hiding right in plain sight.
The whole story opens with this haunting, deeply vulnerable admission. Every now and then I get a little bit tired. I mean, think about that. With just that one line, the stage is instantly set for an exploration of profound emotional exhaustion. It doesn't begin with some grand, sweeping declaration of fiery passion, no. It starts with pure fatigue. And that immediately hooks us, right? Because it feels so incredibly raw, so human, and so relatable, before the actual story even truly gets going.
So, what is actually happening inside one of history's most dramatic power ballads? We really need to unpack this because this isn't just a fun song to sing along to at karaoke. Actually, scratch that. It is fun, but it's also a pretty intense psychological case study of a tumultuous, highly unbalanced relationship. Over the next few minutes, we're going to break down the exact emotional phases woven into these words just to understand the true story being told here.
Okay, let's dive right into this with phase one, the cycle of vulnerability.
See, before the narrator ever makes a single demand of their partner, they establish this highly chaotic internal state. The lyrics explicitly tell us that every now and then they cycle through a massive spectrum of emotion. First they're tired, then nervous, terrified, restless, helpless, and finally, angry. I mean, wow, talk about sheer emotional whiplash. Frankly, just reading this cycle out loud is exhausting. They're bouncing so rapidly from passive fatigue to intense active distress. And get this is all happening before the main chorus even hits. And then, cutting right through all of that internal chaos is this incredibly famous recurring motif. You know the one. Turn around, bright eyes. This acts as a haunting pivot point in the lyrics. On the one hand, you have the narrator repeatedly confessing, every now and then I fall apart. But then, this sudden interjected instruction to turn around shifts the focus entirely outward. It represents their intense, almost magnetic observation of their partner. They're literally breaking through their own internal cycle of falling apart just to focus entirely on the other person.
Which brings us to phase two, the desperate attachment.
As we move into the chorus, we see a massive shift. The narrator completely stops looking inward and starts projecting all of their needs onto their partner. And the language? It changes drastically. We transition entirely away from those hesitant every now and then feelings, straight into absolute, uncompromising demands. Need you now tonight. Need you more than ever. Hold me tight. Holding on forever. See, they aren't casually asking for comfort here. They genuinely believe this permanent connection is the absolute only thing capable of making it right and stopping them from completely falling apart. And this escalating need culminates in this heavy, heavy declaration. Together, we can take it to the end of the line. This lyric is absolutely vital. It perfectly captures an all-consuming, almost desperate codependency that is now fully taken over the relationship. It's no longer just a dynamic of two independent people loving each other, you know? It's become this high-stakes survival mission where they literally have to cling to one another until the absolute end.
Let's move along and see how this builds in phase three. Living in the extremes.
Naturally, living in this constant state of desperate attachment means living in extremes. And here, the physical environment itself becomes a really dark, dramatic metaphor for the romance. Having a shadow on me all of the time represents an inescapable presence, almost a feeling of emotional suffocation. Then the admission that they are always in the dark points directly to deep confusion and this blind, unguided attachment. And finally, living in a powder keg giving off sparks, well, that signals an imminent, unavoidable emotional explosion. These aren't just poetic 80s melodrama words. They map perfectly to very real, severe relationship anxiety. Now, what's really interesting here is the specific imagery of the powder keg. It's incredibly telling. A powder keg is literally a barrel of gunpowder. So by using this metaphor, the lyrics are explicitly signaling that this is a highly volatile, unstable, and dangerously explosive romantic situation. I mean, the sparks are already flying. The narrator is essentially just waiting in agony for this doomed relationship to inevitably blow up. And that inevitable explosion leads us to phase four, the total eclipse. All of that escalating desperation and explosive anxiety finally reaches its absolute inescapable conclusion in the song's ending verses. The text here contrasts the past and the present with devastating clarity. Look at the past. Once upon a time, I was falling in love. But in the present, but now I'm only falling apart. This side-by-side shift shows the complete and total destruction of romantic hope. The relationship hasn't merely faded away. The sheer gravity of this dynamic has actively broken the narrator down into pieces.
We see this stark contrast repeated immediately, this time with light and dark imagery. In the past, once upon a time, there was light in my life. Present, but now there's only love in the dark. The lyrics reinforce this bleak reality by explicitly stating there's nothing I can do, and nothing I can say. The narrator is entirely paralyzed. Their voice is gone, their agency is completely gone, and they have been swallowed up by the suffocating darkness of the situation.
And that leaves us with this final defining phrase: a total eclipse of the heart. Now, an eclipse in nature occurs when one celestial body completely blocks the light of another. So in the context of these lyrics, it perfectly represents the final, irreversible stage of this dynamic. The individual's heart, their joy, and their own personal light have been entirely consumed and blotted out by the sheer weight of this heartbreak.
So I want to leave you with a final, rather provocative question to ponder. Based on the emotional anatomy we've just mapped out today, is holding on to the end of the line really an act of true passionate romance? Or is it actually a detailed portrait of desperate self-destruction? The next time you hear this familiar ballad over radio, remember this breakdown and consider the incredibly fine line between all-consuming love and total emotional collapse. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always look a little deeper at the stories you think you already know.